the form of Darstellen, right? And this is in the sense of representation, right? Hyphenated, P-R-E-S-E-N, right? Representation. And this is an economic value. We'll get to this later. I'll talk about that once I actually get into what she's doing. Right now, I'm just, sort of preliminary work. So the first thing to recognize is in this idea of representation, the distinction of representation as far as political representation. My voice is, in a sense, embodied, transferred to the representative. The representative votes in accordance with, the constituency, but represents me. The role of aesthetics in philosophy, right? So this is what, and she says this is the role of This is why I love philosophy. I wouldn't, for all the money in the world, for all the accolades, for all the prizes, I would never have wanted to be anything other than a philosopher. I love this specific aspect of philosophy is what gets me doing all of this forever. This idea of representation, representing something, right? So something has been presented, and now I'm going to transform, I'm going to represent that thing. For example, I don't want to get into too much accounting. Actually, I think I've done this. I've done a lecture on this, and it's called, if you go into my playlist, there should be a series of videos called something like Aristotle on actuality and potentiality, or something like that. Actual potential, blah blah blah, something like that. I've done videos on the distinction between actualization, actuality, and potentiality in sort of Aristotelian logic. This idea of representation, she doesn't say any of this at all, really is, as far as I'm concerned, housed in that understanding in Aristotle, right? And I've gone through this already, so watch the videos, and I'll actually put a link to Aristotle here. Representation, I'll put link Aristotle. But Aristotle goes through this spiel about the acorn and the oak tree. Watch the video. So let me give you an idea of representation, and then I'll tie this in. Now, Spivak doesn't say any of this, but this will you'll need to understand this to understand what she's saying when we actually start talking about Spivak. And when I actually get into the discussion of Spivak, I'm going to be far more general and loose because I think this is important. So we recognize, insofar as we're talking about the identity of a thing for Aristotle, he's different from Plato, and I have to go quick because I don't want to do a whole Plato-Aristotle thing. Plato thinks that the form of a thing exists outside of the world, in some ethereal space, transcendental. I've already discussed this in many, many videos. Plato's History of the Forms, Hierarchy of the Forms, I have videos on that. Aristotle's Actuality, Potentiality. Aristotle refutes his teacher, says it's not out there, it's in the world. Actually, the form is in the function. So, for Aristotle, form... And you have to recognize that form is an identification, like subjectivity is an identification, right? Subjectivity and form are similar in that sense. It's not interchangeable, but they're similar in the sense. So, for example, what makes a thing a chair isn't some ethereal thing that exists transcendentally. It's the fact that this object functions as a chair. It's a thing that I sit on, right? So that form, this identification, equals the function. Right? So philosophy, no matter what type of philosophy you're doing, really at its base, we sort of, it would be interesting to revisit this idea within a contemporary setting, but from a traditional setting, form equals function within philosophy, right? He put Plato to bed. Now, there are plenty of people who still hold to the Platonic ideal, but for Aristotle, in this sort of physicalist, materialist sense, form equals function. Sorry, my battery's died. Talking too much. So what they ended up doing is the members of the Haitian community, all this debris is scattered, let me get my notes, all this debris is scattered all around, and they took that material stuff and they represented this in aesthetic pieces of art, right? So that the art was a reflection, right, sort of like found art, it was a reflection of the destruction, but it transcended the destruction. It became a thing, an object of beauty, right? So this is what philosophers and philosophy does, right? We talk about representation. The third bullet point: representation is thus technically understood in the form of functional transformation, right? Functional transformation. We've transformed the function of a thing, and insofar as I've transformed the function of a thing from a table to a sled, from debris to art, I've represented one and the same material object, right? I've transformed the nature in which this material object can be interpreted, right? So this is the two forms of representation. So when we're talking about representation, there is a sense in which we can talk about political representation in the truest sense, right? Remember, all of this goes back to accounts of both subjectivity and hegemonic power. So there is a sense in which the individual needs to be represented within that discourse of hegemonic power, right? And there is a sense in which we can talk about representation in the second sense, in the second more philosophical sense of what I call functional transformation, right? So political representation, functional transformation. This idea of functional transformation is my idea. All right. Next thing that you need to know to really have an understanding of what Spivak is attempting to do here is a really good structuralist understanding, right? So you should understand semiotics. Change that to 6. In anticipation for this video series, I knew that I was going to do a lecture on semiotics, and I've already done a 50-part, something like that, like a 50-part, 7 or 8 hours of lecture on just the idea of semiotics, specifically Saussurean. I didn't do Peirce, but I did Saussurean, Locke, and Lacanian accounts of semiotics. Within semiotics, it's important to understand the function of the relationship between signification and signal, right? And I talked about this in a lot of detail already. If you want, and I have to put link here too. Add link. Add link. If you want a good understanding of that account, actually I think I can't see it here, but actually I did already put the link in the PDF. I think it's blue already. So you can click the sign semiotics and structuralism, and it should take you to the playlist that I already have up. And as I said, it's very in depth. Again, I'm not expecting you to watch 7 hours of me lecturing on semiotics. That might be way too much. But hopefully my YouTube channel will be here for a very long time, and you can at your leisure go back and sort of get this more grand understanding. Okay, so with respect to semiotics, to fully understand Spivak's argument, you should already have some understanding of structuralism or semiotics. So I've already done this. So in semiotics, we have many different things which are all basically the same. We have concept and sound pattern. We have signification and signal. We have signified and signifier. And then what we have, she says, in the Marxist sense, is the distinction between value and labor. I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit. So, again, preliminary background, you should have an understanding of the relationship between the signifier and the signified, so on and so forth. Having an understanding of this will let us understand sort of this Marxist conception of the distinction, or not the distinction, the relationship between value and labor in the semiotic sense. So let me read a little bit, and I have my paper here. Let me read a little bit. According, I think this is the last bit too, and this is the last bit for my introduction remarks. This is an extended introduction, but nonetheless. According to Marx, under capitalism, this is a quote. According to Marx, under capitalism, value as produced is necessary and surplus labor. Right? We get necessary surplus labor. We are going to call that thing value. This is computed as the representation science